Good evening, everybody. Let's cultivate our motivation. Again, coming back to realizing that we have a very precious opportunity with this life, and that it's hard to have a life in which there are the freedoms and fortunes to hear, think, and meditate on the Dharma. And yet such a life is very meaningful for attaining our spiritual goals, for preparing for future lives, for attaining liberation and enlightenment. And so it's important that we be aware of this and put our mind in that direction and not waste time on things that aren't really important in the long run. So this involves really reformatting the hard disk of our mind, which is so attached to the happiness of this life, and instead looking at life in a very different way so that our priorities are different. And we want to train our mind so that one of our priorities is the welfare of other living beings, and not just their welfare while they're in cyclic existence, but their welfare in terms of lasting happiness, of attaining liberation and enlightenment. And so with other beings' spiritual happiness as well as temporal happiness as our priorities, then we aim for full enlightenment for their benefit. And so let's cultivate that motivation. So in this kind of motivation, you can see how many different Lamrim meditations fit together. So you have the meditation on the freedoms and fortunes of the precious human life, on the purpose of the precious human life, the rarity and difficulty of attaining the precious human life. And then the teaching on how our present priority, due to our ignorance, is the 8 worldly concerns, and the happiness of this life, and how obsessed we are with this life. Why? Because things appear truly existent to us, and we feel that there's a truly existent me, a truly existent objective reality, a truly existent happiness and suffering, and so our mind gets completely overwhelmed by the appearance of this life because it all looks so solid and real. And so with that comes the attachment to the 8 worldly concerns. And so what we're trying to do when we see the purpose of our life and the fact that it's rare and that it's not going to last forever, so there we have the meditation on death and impermanence, is we try and change our priorities. So right now the 8 worldly concerns are our priorities. What we're trying to change our mind to is having the priority of the welfare of others, and not just the welfare of friends, because we already have that. Okay, but the welfare of friends, enemies, and strangers, and not just their welfare in this life, not just their welfare while they're in samsara, but their long-term welfare in terms of getting out of cyclic existence, so liberation and enlightenment. So if that's our criteria, that's our priority, is the welfare of others, then how are we going to, live out that priority? How are we going to live our lives so that the welfare of others is our priority? Okay? And that's through the aspiration to attain full enlightenment for the benefit of others. Okay? So we aim for that full enlightenment. Then, if we want to attain full enlightenment, what do we have to do to attain it? We don't just sit around and go, well, I want to attain full enlightenment for the benefit of any all sentient beings. No. You know, it's like we got to do something. Okay, so what do we have to do? We have to practice the 6 far-reaching attitudes and the 4 ways of assembling disciples. But to do that, we have to understand the 4 noble truths properly. And to do that, we have to understand, you know, that we're going to die and that karma, you know, is going to lead us to our next rebirth and so on. Okay? So we have a lot of other topics that we have to understand before we can really have that pure bodhicitta motivation, even though we keep generating it in an artificial way right now to train our mind in it. Okay? And so what we've been going through now in Mind Training Like Rays of the Sun is the last chunk about how to cultivate bodhicitta. We started with the 4 preliminaries, the first chunk. 4 preliminaries are precious human life, death and impermanence, karma and its effects, the disadvantages of cyclic existence. Okay? So that contains the essence in the lamrim of the initial practitioner and the middle practitioner. Okay? And then when we started here, after we got through those 4 preliminaries, then we started on how to generate the bodhicitta. And we've especially been using the method of equalizing and exchanging self with others. Okay? And so we have in particular recently been talking about the disadvantages of self-centeredness and the benefits of cherishing others. Okay, so remember with the disadvantages of self-centeredness, we're seeing our self-centered attitude as something separate from the conventional self. Okay, so that we can separate it out and look at that self-centered attitude and say, you've been the cause of all of my trouble. Okay, so when we say the cause of all of my trouble, that my is referring to the conventional self. But you, the cause of all my trouble, the you is referring to the self-centeredness. Okay, so don't confuse the conventional self with the self-centeredness, because if you do, you're going to start hating yourself for being so selfish, which is what we were taught to do when we were kids. And we have to unlearn that because it's not very useful. Okay, got it? And so this meditation on the kindness of others, is very, very important in order to see others as worthy of our affection and as affectionable, okay, as something to be cherished, and so that we have a real feeling of warmth inside of our hearts when we see other living beings. And then the question comes up, well, what happens when other living beings don't do what we want them to do, and when they act negatively, and when they're obnoxious and cruel and harmful and inconsiderate and blah, blah, blah? Okay, so then we have to practice patience with them. And patience or fortitude doesn't mean that you just kind of stuff your anger in and glue a silly smile on your face and say, oh, I love everybody, even though they're such idiots. You know, it doesn't mean that. Yeah, because that's all phony baloney, okay? What we're really trying to do is see that sentient beings are kind, and yet at the same time they're under the sway of their own afflictions. Just like we want people to see us as kind and also to be tolerant with us, because we're under the sway of our afflictions, and so we don't always act properly, do we? But we want others to be tolerant with us and compassionate. So we train our mind to have that same look for others. And you know, what's very interesting in this thing about seeing others as kind, because you know, we can exert some energy to see them as kind, but our ordinary view is, you know, they're not very kind, they're selfish, and they're cheating me, and they're lying to me, and they're deceiving me, and they're rejecting me, and they're abandoning me, and they disagree with my ideas, and they talk bad behind my back, and basically I can't trust sentient beings. Okay, that's our kind of normal outlook in one way or another. Okay. But when we get attached to a sentient being, what do? All of that goes bye-bye, doesn't it? Okay. When we're attached to somebody, we can trust them up and down and across, and they're never going to let us down. They're never going to betray our trust. They're the most wonderful things since sliced bread, and I need this person to be happy. Yeah, and it's true, isn't it? You know, when we're attached to somebody who's perfect. I mean, come on, we wouldn't be attached to somebody who's anything less than perfect, would we? We're not that stupid. Yeah, so we're attached to somebody who's perfect. So when that perfect person makes some kind of mistakes, we just ignore it, don't we? We just gloss over it, we explain it away. You know what I mean? Yeah, like when you're falling in love with somebody. It's like they do something stupid and you think it's cute. Yeah, and they make a wrong decision and you say, oh, it's just because they were tired. Or they do something harmful and you think, oh, they were just confused. They wouldn't do that again, right? Yeah? Okay, so here you can see a perfect example of how when we're attached to somebody, we see all their good qualities and don't see any of their negative qualities, right? Yeah? So why not take that same perspective and put it on all sentient beings, where we can see kindness in everybody and ignore their bad qualities? Yeah, why not? I'm not saying, you know, see everybody with attachment, but just as we see the person we're attached to as 100% good and forget and excuse and forgive their faults, why can't we do that with other people and see them as worthy of our affection and forget and excuse and forgive their faults? Why not? Yeah?
Stir the mind. Confusion.
Yeah. Well, it's the mind's only, we don't do that because we're so biased. Yeah. But when we see how our mind can create somebody in a certain way, well then why not pay attention to sentient beings' good qualities and, you know, not emphasize and dwell on their faults, problems? Why not? We do it with the people we're attached to. Why not do it with everybody? Okay? Because if we see everybody's good qualities and we forgive their mistakes, our heart's going to be so much more open and gentle and tolerant and accepting. Won't it? Yeah? So why not? Okay, so with that as a prelude, let's go back to what our author Nam Kapel was saying. Okay, because where we left off a couple of weeks ago, wow, it seems like a couple of years ago. This time is quite strange, isn't it? Yeah, it's only 2 weeks ago. only 2 weeks? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Okay. Was we had left off with Shantideva's verse, that in which saying that we provoke others by our negative actions, thereby they create negative karma, and they experience horrific rebirths because of that. So aren't we destroying them in some way by provoking their afflictions? Okay? So again, this is not to blame ourselves for other people's negativities. Yeah, we're not doing that. But what we're doing is counteracting the mind that says, you know, other people are troublesome to me and I don't care about them, by seeing that when other people are troublesome to us, they are creating negative karma, in which case they're going to suffer. So why feel anger towards them? Okay, that's the point of thinking like this. Not to get into some weird kind of psychological thing of everybody's negative karma is my fault and, you know, I'm responsible for everybody else's emotions. Not doing that. Okay, are you clear? Are you clear on this? Yeah, because I really try and dissect this, because there's so many ways in which we can get confused here and think incorrectly. Okay, so he says, now especially when we are entering the door of the great vehicle teachings, these beings harm us in many ways. Okay, we're trying to practice Mahayana, bodhicitta. Sentient beings are going to harm us in many ways. Why? We have a lot of negative karma that opens the door. They have a lot of afflictions that provide the energy. Okay? Normal, to be expected. Nothing surprising in other sentient beings harming us. This is samsara. Why are we so shocked? Yeah. Because they thereby create obstacles for themselves to enter the great vehicle doctrine, they will experience the suffering of cyclic existence in general, and the 3 bad rebirths in particular. And so because of their having afflictions in relationship to us, they get hung up in samsara and they experience the 3 lower realms. Okay? We should feel compassion for their becoming vessels of the manifold sufferings of the bad rebirths. Yeah, so whenever we see others creating negative karma, rather than getting angry at them, have compassion for them, because they're creating the cause of their own suffering. Yeah. Sometimes we get angry at people when they do stupid things, don't we? Yeah. We get angry at them when they create negative karma. Don't you know any better than that? Come on. Yeah. But clearly they don't. So isn't compassion fitting in situations when others are overwhelmed by suffering? Moreover, those who are harming us have in fact been our mothers countless times before. Okay? So when we see somebody harming us, don't get locked into the inherently existent view of that's an objective enemy out there who's always been a permanent enemy trying to harm me. That's not true. That's not the reality, the conventional reality of the other person. They've also been our mother, who's been kind to us and fed us and nourished us and taken care of us and so on and so forth. Okay? And in addition, in previous lives, we have eaten their flesh, drunk their blood, gnawed at their bones, and worn their skins time beyond number. So in previous rebirths, when we've been animals, or as human beings, we've eaten the flesh of others, haven't we? If you're not vegetarian, most of us weren't vegetarian as kids. We ate the flesh of others, didn't we? You know, drank their blood. You say, drank their blood? I didn't drink anybody's blood. Actually, This is how I became a vegetarian, not from drinking somebody's blood, but I was in Germany, and this is 1972, and they have these sausages that are blood sausages. You know, there's meat and blood in there, and we were camping, and we got some of these things and cooked them and cut them open, and all this blood came out, and that's when it hit me that I'm eating somebody else's body. Yeah, and I don't want to do that. But, you know, people in Germany eat those kinds of sausages all the time. Okay? And also in previous lives, when we were animals and ate others, we drunk their blood. Okay, gnawed at their bones. Gnawed at their bones. That sounds so barbaric. But what goes on at a steakhouse?
Or turkey Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, or a turkey Thanksgiving dinner. We're gnawing other sentient beings' bones. We've worn their skins. Yeah, if you wear leather, you're wearing the skin of some other sentient being. If you have a fur coat. Okay, so we've done all of that. If all the milk and curd, you know, which has come from other sentient beings, that we have drunk in all of our lifetimes, were gathered together, a vessel the size of the 3 worlds would not contain it. The times we have killed, beaten, and robbed them also cannot be counted. We like to say, me? I haven't killed, beaten, and robbed anybody. You haven't killed anybody in this life? No insects? No animals? Maybe not any human beings, but we killed insects and animals. You never robbed? You never shoplifted? You never stole from your parents? You never cheated on your income tax? You never got into the theater without paying a ticket? You never used your boss, you know, your company's stuff for your own personal use? Yeah, we've robbed, haven't we? Okay, beaten. Yeah, we've never been in a fight, even when we were kids. Never thrown sand in the sandbox at somebody else. Come on. Okay, never threw rocks at somebody. Never threw anything at anybody? Really? Really? Never? Watermelon, okay. Okay, we've thrown things at people. Okay. We have taken their kindness for granted on all these occasions. So all these occasions when we've harmed them, they've also been kind. I mean, if somebody came up to you and said, you know, I'm hungry and I'd like to eat you for lunch, what would you say? Would you say, go right ahead? You know, cut here, I'm happy to offer my body. Well, that's what we do when we eat meat, isn't it? It's like going up to some sentient being and saying, you know, I'm hungry, can I eat you? Except we're not so polite to ask their permission, we just do it. Okay? So they've been kind to give us their flesh, their skin, their bones, everything, all these times. Okay? And we've taken their kindness for granted. And so now we should repay our debt to them, thinking, remembering your kindness, this is my duty. Okay? So when we think how much we've taken other sentient beings for granted, then to now say, you know, remembering your kindness is my duty. It's something I have to really keep in mind and train myself in. Okay? So, you know, in so many aspects of our life, and we've gone through this again and again and again, about how dependent we are on others and how kind others are to us. And yet, we have to keep remembering it so many times because we keep forgetting it that many times, don't we? See, singling out those we apprehend as enemies, we should enhance love and compassion by means of both giving happiness and taking on suffering. So the taking and giving meditation, which I'll describe later, it comes later. We should particularly rely on those who harm us, since they provide the basis for us to practice patience. So when we're doing the taking and giving, you know, it's so much easier to take suffering and give happiness to somebody that you're very fond of and don't want to see suffer. But somebody that you don't like, to take suffering and give happiness, we want to take happiness and give suffering. You know? But these are precisely the ones that, you know, when our mind is well trained, we should really emphasize in our practice of taking on their suffering and giving them happiness. So especially the sentient beings that we fear, those that we feel threatened by, those who have betrayed our trust, those who have harmed us, those who are out to get us, okay? To really think of their kindness, you know, and to take their suffering and give them happiness. Okay, we should particularly rely on those who harm, since they provide the basis for us to practice patience. Even the 6 perfections arise from relying on them. Okay, so we need our enemies. Because these foes are an object of forbearance or patience, we can meditate on patience or fortitude. If we have fortitude, the 2 perfections of generosity and ethics will have preceded it, because we do generosity, ethics, and then patience. Okay, and the other 3, effort, meditative stabilization, and discriminating intelligence, will be derived by relying on it. So depending upon fortitude, we then generate effort, meditative stability, and wisdom. Okay? When we let our thoughts turn over the significance of this, we will realize that objectively it is our foes who place enlightenment in the palm of our hands. Okay? So our foes are giving us the biggest present ever. Okay, enlightenment in the palm of your hand. The great Chekawa expressed it like this: whether they are our enemies or dear ones, all are the objects of disturbing emotions. Seeing everyone as a spiritual friend will bring happiness even when you are alone. Okay, so whether somebody is an enemy or a dear one, we generate our afflictive emotions in regard to them anyway, don't we? Attachment, aversion, jealousy, pride. Okay, so seeing this, yeah, and seeing how our mind gets uncontrolled, then everybody becomes like a spiritual friend by providing the opportunity for us to practice the Dharma. And so seeing sentient beings in this way, we will be happy even if we're alone. Okay, we won't need other sentient beings to entertain us. Yeah, because we have all the entertainment we'll ever need watching our own mind. Yeah. Okay, so we should practice just as he has advised. Okay, for instance, the spiritual preceptor is extremely kind because he bestows the vows that are the cause for us to attain liberation and omniscience. Okay, so we see our preceptor is very kind because we cherish the precepts, we cherish the vows, and we know that that person's opening the door for us to attain liberation and omniscience by giving us the precepts, so we see them as kind. Okay, our enemy too is like that because relying on him we can perfect patience, which is the cause of great enlightenment. So just the way we have to rely on our preceptor to take precepts, and we see the preceptor as kind, we have to rely on an enemy to practice fortitude, so we see that enemy as kind. Okay? This is like the saying, don't spit on delicious food once it is in your mouth. The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life says, Therefore, like finding treasure in my house without any effort on my part, I should be delighted that my enemy becomes my friend in my efforts for enlightenment. Okay? So just like, you know, you live a very simple life and all of a sudden you discover a whole treasure house, you know, under the baseboards of your house, yeah, and you're so happy, then seeing our enemy is like that, because our enemy becomes our friend in our practice of the path to enlightenment. How? By giving us the opportunity to practice patience. Okay, so this is my story about Sam. Want to hear my story about Sam again? So once upon a time, I was just sweet, innocent little old me, practicing so nicely in Dharamsala, thinking that I didn't have a problem with anger at all. And then my teachers sent me to work in this Italian Dharma center. And the first director and I got along pretty well, but then the second, he resigned and another person became the director. And he and I did not get along very well at all. And that's because he did all these horrible, distressing, negative things. You cannot believe what this person did. So obnoxious. Totally. And then, of course, he had all of his cohorts, the macho Italian monks, who drove me up a wall. It was all their fault. I was sweet, innocent, kind, benevolent me. And it even got so bad that one time in a community meeting I started to cry because they were making such fun of me. I decided, okay, I'm going to stop pretending. So, you know, that was, and one of them told me, you know, Sam, the director, he told me that I was the biggest hindrance to the Dharma Center, and that he was going to call Lama right away and tell him to get rid of me. I said, please do that, I want to leave. You know, and he took things off. Well, anyway. So I wrote to Lama also and said, Lama, please, can I leave this place? He's driving me crazy. I'm creating so much negative karma, and it's all their fault. And that's when Lama wrote back and said, yes, dear, we'll talk about it. I'll be there in 6 months. And years later, I had a friend when I lived there, Raffaello, and Rafa told me that his image of that time was seeing me walk across the courtyard like this, so angry, you know, just stomping across the courtyard with Sam or one of the macho monks tailing straight behind me, you know. So that's how I learned Shantideva Chapter 6. Because I would go back to my room every evening and read Chapter 6 and calm myself down. And then I would go into the office the very next morning, and they were up to their little things, and I would get angry again. So eventually Lama came, and I got permission to leave. And I went back to India, and no, actually to Nepal, to Kopan. And so in those days, that's when they had the old Gompa at Kopan. I think every structure that was at Kopan when I first went there has now been destroyed and redone. But anyway, that was the old Gompa, and Rinpoche had a room on the small room on the top, and then sometimes we would just sit out on the roof because it had a flat roof, you know. And so we were sitting there, and this whole peaceful Kathmandu Valley below us, so beautiful, and you know, this kind of fresh air. It was before Kathmandu got so polluted, and so Rinpoche says to me, who's kinder to you, Buddha or Sam? You know, only a question Rinpoche could ask. And I thought, what's he talking about, you know? Doesn't he know what happened? And so, of course, I said, you know, well, Buddha's kinder to me. Buddha leads me to enlightenment. And Rinpoche looked at me like, haven't gotten it yet, kid, have you? You know. And then he went on to explain that Sam was so much kinder to me than all the Buddhas. All the Buddhas, not just Buddha Shakyamuni. Sam was kinder than all the Buddhas, because in order to become a Buddha, I had to perfect the practice of patience. And you can only perfect the practice of patience if you have an enemy. You can't practice fortitude with friends. You can't practice fortitude with people who are kind to you. You need people who are mean to you in order to practice. So he said, I needed Sam, and that Sam was kinder to me than all the Buddhas. Of course, that was not what I wanted to hear. I wanted some consoling and, oh, you know, some sympathy, like, oh, I know it was so tough. You were there and you worked with Sam and he's very disagreeable and nobody likes him, and you stuck to it for that whole time working with him. You really deserve a Purple Heart. You're one of my best disciples for enduring this, really working for the benefit of the Dharma and cultivating bodhicitta. That's what I wanted to hear. That is not what Rinpoche said. Yeah, Rinpoche said, Sam is kinder to you than all the Buddhas, and you need Sam. You know? So I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought, what is Rinpoche saying? So that was kind of my koan for a while, you know, trying to figure out what was going on. Okay, so that's my story of Sam.
So then, well, how long did it take you to understand your koan, to understand what Rinpoche was?
How long did it take me? It took me, It took me a long time. I mean, I knew I was angry, and so I did some retreat after that. And my anger was just like, you know. So every session I tried to meditate on patience and fortitude to calm my mind down. And I'd get it a little bit calmer, and then the session would end, and then I would think of him, and I would get angry again. And, you know, this went on. It was a 4-month retreat, you know, so it lasted a while. And then I think it was, you know, maybe in that process, maybe I was reading some more of chapter 6, that I began to understand what Rinpoche was talking about. Yeah. And I remember one time, I don't know whether it was that during the retreat or sometime later, but bumping into Sam at the water tap, because we were both in India at that later time, and just kind of the way we looked at each other, it's like we both knew that we were sorry for what happened, but we didn't say anything. But we knew that we were sorry. Okay. So then Shantideva also said, when anyone abuses me, or even when others do me harm, when they afflict me in such ways as these, may they have all the fortune to gain enlightenment. Yeah? So when somebody's harming us, when they're being disagreeable, to respond with, may they have every conducive circumstance to practice the Dharma and attain enlightenment. Sometimes this is easier to think and to feel after the situation is over. Because when the situation's going on, it's hard to switch our mind. And also when the situation's going on, sometimes you have to act rather directly. And it's easy for us to slip into our usual state of mind when we act directly. The great Chekawa has also said, even when hurt is offered in return for help, in other words, when others hurt us in response to our help, respond by meditating on great compassion. In this world, the superior person will accept such misfortune while leading others to goodness. Okay, so when your mind is 100% focused on bodhicitta, then that gives you the internal strength to accept the misfortune because you're trying to lead others to enlightenment. And so you know that's hard. You know they're going to go kicking and screaming. Yeah. And so you're not expecting sentient beings to say, thank you, you're so kind. You know that they have afflictions. And so you know leading them to enlightenment isn't going to be so easy. And so, you still wish them happiness and at the same time accept their behavior. Mm-hmm. Okay, if we understand how to train our minds in this way, then just as we could wander across a plain of swords if we had physical courage, or journeying to the mythical Jewel Islands, we would need to seek no stones to throw at vicious dogs. So a period will come when there is no time when we do not train the mind. Okay, so, if you have physical courage, you could walk across a plain of swords. I don't understand this thing about traveling to the mythical Jewel Islands. That there must be some kind of story. Maybe you need to have stones when you travel to some islands, but not to them. I don't understand it. In any case, the conclusion is a time will come when there is no time when you do not train the mind. Okay? So eventually we'll get to the point where whatever is happening in our life, we will use it to train our mind. Okay? And so we won't slip back into the old habits anymore because we're so mindful of what's going on and so mindful of the Dharma, remembering the Dharma all the time, that in every situation we will use it to train our mind. Okay? This is the single point of all teachings. Okay? If you have that, it is like saying one doctrine for one person, and that one teaching is purposeful. Okay? Thus, since it has one purpose, you can call the doctrine the practice of the awakening mind, or whatever name you like, as the saying goes about Pelden Lamo. Okay, anyway, what it means is, okay, the one doctrine that we want to practice is the bodhicitta, yeah, and we want to use it, and it's very purposeful, it's very meaningful, and we want to use it in every situation that we encounter to train our mind. So all these teachings of transforming adversity into the path, we want to really be mindful of them and practice them whenever possible. Okay? So Namkapala is saying, whatever name you call this, it comes down to practicing bodhicitta every moment. And he's making the analogy because there's a verse to Pelden Lamo, who was one of the wrathful female goddesses, that says, O 100-named lady with 1,000 characteristics, by whatever name we invoke you, that is your name. However we imagine you, those are your qualities. So however you call bodhicitta, that's what you're practicing. Yeah. And Langri Tampa said, recognize sentient beings as the mothers who give birth to the conquerors of the 3 times. Okay. So how do sentient beings give birth to the Buddhas of the 3 times? The conquerors, their Buddhas are called conquerors because they've conquered the afflictions. Okay? How do mother sentient beings give birth to the Buddhas of the 3 times? It's not physically giving birth to them. It's because in order to attain Buddhahood, you have to practice. And who do we practice in relationship to? Sentient beings. To practice generosity, we need sentient beings to give to. To practice ethical conduct, we need sentient beings to refrain from harming. To practice fortitude, we need sentient beings to be patient for. To practice effort, we need sentient beings to create virtue for. To practice meditative stabilization, we need sentient beings whose welfare we care about, so we want to attain samadhi. To practice wisdom, we need sentient beings that are the basis upon which we explore whether things truly exist or not. Okay? So in all aspects of our practice, we depend on sentient beings. Hey, Langri Tampa also said, the awakening mind is generated in dependence on sentient beings. But like the saying, whatever you do when wearing an iron helmet is unpleasant, to entertain such thoughts that wherever you are you feel vexed when encountering other sentient beings who displease you is like being unhappy with the causes of enlightenment. In other words, okay, there's the saying that whatever you do when wearing an iron helmet is unpleasant, okay? So maybe when you're cutting down the trees, when you're wearing your helmet, you know, it's a little bit sweaty and unpleasant or whatever, okay? So if like that, saying, whenever I'm with sentient beings, it's very troublesome, okay? Because we often think like that, don't we? Oh, sentient beings are so troublesome. I want to go do retreat all by myself, you know, and get away from these troublesome sentient beings so I can cultivate compassion for them. Yeah, or I want to stay in my room. I don't want to relate to these sentient beings. They're so obnoxious. Okay? You know, so like every time you wear the helmet, you feel uncomfortable. Every time you see sentient beings, your mind says, yeah, I'm unhappy. Okay? So if you have that kind of attitude, it's like being unhappy with the causes of enlightenment. Why? Because sentient beings are the causes of our enlightenment, in that we have to depend upon them to attain enlightenment. Got it? Okay. The exalted Shantideva has concisely stated the advantages of being concerned about others and the faults of selfishness. He said, what need is there to say more? The childish work for their own benefit, the Buddhas work for the welfare of others. Just look at the difference between them. I find that verse so powerful, okay? The childish work for their own benefits. Yeah, because we think that by working for our own benefit, we're going to be happy. The Buddhas bend over backward to work for the benefit of and the welfare of others. And we look at that and say, who wants to do that? It's too much energy. But who's happier? Us, who work only for our own benefit, or Buddhas who work for the benefit of others? Who has great bliss? Us or the Buddhas? You know? We so, what's the word? We stick to the self-centered mind so conscientiously with tremendous fear of letting go of it. Who am I going to become if I let go of this self-centered mind? And yet, in the process of doing so, we are miserable. And cherishing others and making their welfare and their happiness our priority is so terrifying to us. You know, if I make other people's happiness my priority, what's going to happen to me? I'm going to be tired, I'm going to be exhausted, I'm going to be unhappy, I'm going to work myself into a ditch and curl up and die, you know, because I have no boundaries and I have no limits and I won't be able to say no, and I'm just going to get totally exhausted and collapse if I cherish others. That's what we think, isn't it? So we don't even try. Because we always say, can't cherish others, because I'll collapse if I do it. So don't even try. Yeah? Just cherish myself. That's good enough. All sentient beings, well, I'll cherish one of them, who happens to be me. You know? Because if I don't cherish myself, nobody else is going to cherish me, then I'm really going to be miserable. That's what we think, isn't it? And yet, who's happier, us or the Buddha? You know? When you look at it that way, you can see that there's something very wrong with the way we think. Yeah? So we can see something's wrong with the way I think. But what is it? You know? What's wrong with the way I think? And it's so hard for us to tease this apart because we cling so much to cherishing ourselves. And we can't imagine life without it. You know, we think we're just going to curl up and die if we don't get what we want. Yeah? I don't have the food I like. If people don't appreciate me enough, if I don't get the acknowledgement, if I don't get enough sleep, if the sun doesn't shine enough, if people don't say thank you to me and appreciate me, I'm going to curl up and die. That's what we think, isn't it? Isn't it? Yep. Isn't it? Yeah. And yet the Buddha's given up that way of thinking and is tremendously happy. And we're so afraid to give up the cause of our suffering. Isn't that amazing? You know, when you hit that, it's like how terrified we are to give up the cause of our suffering. Then, when the Buddha says we suffer from ignorance, then you get a feeling of what ignorance means. You know, how ignorant we are that we hang on to the cause of our suffering for dear life. That's like the story, I told you the story about my brother when he was little. We had a swimming pool, and my brother was really little, riding his tricycle. He was maybe 3 years old or something. And the guy who was cleaning the pool, thank goodness, was out there. And my brother rode his tricycle into the deep end, which was 10 feet deep. The tricycle sank to the bottom, and Russ held on for dear life. Yeah, he was afraid to let go of his tricycle, which was at the bottom of the swimming pool. And that's like we are. We're afraid to let go of the cause of our suffering. And thank goodness Pete was there and dove in and pried him free from his tricycle. Yeah? Okay, so we're almost done with this section. Thinking about this deeply, we should see that all faults arise from selfishness, whereas all good qualities come from benevolence towards others. This means that we should be concerned about sentient beings, should be fond of them, and think of them with affection. Therefore, we should keep up our efforts until our thoughts of concern for ourselves and neglect of others have changed places. This concludes my brief account of how to exchange self and others. Okay? So we need to keep up our efforts of practicing seeing sentient beings as kind and seeing the faults of self-centeredness until we get to the point where our concern for ourselves and our neglect of others change places. so that we have concern for others and we neglect our self-centeredness. Okay? So, it's really important when doing this to create the causes, to really spend a long time contemplating the faults of self-centeredness and the benefits of cherishing others and the kindness of others. If we don't do those two steps and instead try and cherish others and ignore our self-centeredness, that's not going to work, because our mind is still seeing ourselves as most important and sentient beings as not worthy of our affection. So if we jump to the conclusion without creating the cause, we're going to get all tied up inside, and it's not going to work in our practice. Therefore, it's really important that we spend a lot of time and consistently come back to the meditations on the kindness of others, the benefits of cherishing them, how much we've received from them, and the faults of the self-centeredness. Okay? Okay? Any questions?
It was interesting when you were talking about putting your attention on the other and not the self. I immediately thought of, oh no, self, and so I had to put in self-cherishing. So to really keep bringing it back to the difference between self and self-cherishing, that to me is really key.
Yeah.
For my mind.
Right, right. Okay. So your comment that the key is really bringing it back to the difference between the conventional self and self-centeredness. Because if we say cherish others and neglect ourselves, then, and if we see self as, the conventional self, then we go, and, we cling very hard. But if we remember it's the self-centeredness, neglect our self-centeredness. Yeah, don't feed it. Yeah, that's real important. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, so if you start to adopt this attitude, you still don't really have the skills to put those weak motivations into practice. And so then what happens is things just happen how they happen and you react.
So you're saying even if you try...
It would be just to focus on be more clear about my motivations and just rest with that's what I can do.
So say that again?
It feels like as you try to put this into practice, sometimes you have even good motivations for things, but the skill level isn't there at times, and things kind of go how they go.
Okay.
They do what they do.
Yeah.
So
So
you have your own reactions.
Okay, so you're saying sometimes we may cherish others, we may try and put it into practice, but we don't have the skill level. So then sentient beings do what they do, and then at that point we forget our cherishing of others and that self-centeredness is our enemy, and we go back to our own habits. Well, that's a situation we have to train in, isn't it? Yeah? If we start out with a good motivation and then we lose our good motivation partway through, then it's a situation that we have to train with, where we have to build our good motivation so that it is more than just the first motivation, but that it hangs on and stays on in the situation. So it's good that we have it to start out with, but we have to maintain our good motivation throughout the whole action, not just at the beginning. Not just, you're wonderful and I'm full of kindness towards you and I do something for you and you didn't say thank you and I'm really pissed. It's like we've got to try and, you know, those things happen. You're completely right. Those things happen. So then we say, okay, you know, I started off with good motivation. I went back to my old bad motivation. What happened in the middle there that happened? And what can I do so that I can, you know, try and keep my good motivation throughout the whole thing, no matter how sentient beings act?
What about the skill, though?
The skill? You know, we just do what we can, don't we? Your skill isn't the problem. You do what you can to benefit. But the problem is that we get upset when it doesn't turn out the way we want it to, or when sentient beings don't do what we want them to do. But our skill is our skill, and we use it. Okay? And sometimes, rather than just tell ourselves, oh, I don't have the skill, I'm going to make a mess, try it. You know, for example, this is one of the things that I've learned by being in the position of having to give Dharma talks, is that many times I don't feel well, or I'm tired, or I'm in a bad mood, you know, and people are expecting me to give a Dharma talk, and I have to give one anyway. It doesn't matter how I feel. Now, last week I was so wiped out that I really, you know, it would have been really very difficult for me to give a reasonable talk. But aside from that kind of situation, I might feel sick, I might feel in a bad mood, I might feel tired, but I show up to teach, and it all turns out fine. Turns out fine, because as soon as you start, you forget about yourself, and as soon as you forget about yourself, things turn out well. You know? Because like when you give a talk, you have to focus on the talk. You can't focus on my stomach hurts, my head hurts, I'm exhausted, I want to go to bed. There's no space for that. You have to focus on what you're talking about. As soon as you focus on that, then the other stuff, you forget about it. Okay? So, you know, we've got to give ourselves a chance to act skillfully, instead of just saying at the beginning, it's too hard, I can't do it. Yeah, you getting what I'm saying? Yeah? So, you know, play with it. Give ourselves a little chance. Yeah? It was like you with the chainsaw. You said you were afraid of it, but you wanted to learn how to use it so that you wouldn't continue to be afraid of it. So it's like that, you know? Then you learn how to do something, and so that you have that skill. Okay. Yeah?
Somebody online asked, can a person go on a 1 or 2 year retreat and shed themselves of many afflictions and get rid of the self-centered thoughts? A little bit at a time sure doesn't seem to work.
Okay, so somebody's saying, can we go on a retreat for a year and 2, shut ourselves away, get rid of the self-centered thought, because just practicing in daily life for a short retreat doesn't work very well? Sure, you can do it, yeah, but you have to be capable of doing retreat for a year or 2, yeah. Now, we have dreams of doing retreat for a year or 2, don't we? Okay. How do we do when we actually sit down to do a retreat? Do we have the self-discipline to do all those sessions? Do we have the renunciation to deal with the food, no matter how it's like? Do we understand the Dharma well enough to know how to meditate properly? So it's fine to have that aspiration to do a long retreat. So go about creating the causes for it. You know, it's like if you want to go to college, you have to create the causes for it. You can't just show up on the first day in school. Yeah? So similarly, to do a long retreat, you have to create the causes for it, which include doing shorter retreats and getting a good Dharma education and learning to practice in your daily life so that your mind is not so compartmentalized into, I practice Dharma on the cushion and I can't practice off the cushion. You've got to get rid of that kind of compartmentalization. Yeah? So it's wonderful to do long retreat. We should all aspire to. So we should really create the causes to be able to do a long retreat and do it successfully. Yeah? Because locking yourself up and not talking to others, you know, that's not so difficult. I mean, it's hard. The food doesn't come when you want. It's not the right kind of food. Okay? But, you know, you take a bunch of magazines, you take your iPod, you take your email and your internet, and you lock yourself up and, you know, you're okay. But to do retreat and have it be successful, we need to create a lot of causes. So it's good that we create the causes.
I know of an Indian yogi
Mm-hmm.
who did a 2-year retreat, a solo retreat. The first thing he did when he got out was he screamed at somebody.
Okay, so she knew an Indian yogi who did a 2-year retreat, and the first thing he did when he got out was scream at somebody. And this is the typical Tibetan story about the person who did retreat and got out, and somebody came to him and was rude, and he got angry. Yeah? So. Okay.